He was the face of adrenaline, the symbol of speed, the soul of a billion-dollar movie franchise. But after the cameras stopped rolling, the real story began. When Paul Walker tragically died in 2013, fans across the world mourned. But what the public never saw, what even some of his closest friends didn't know, was what lay hidden behind a set of locked garage doors. Inside was more than a car collection. It was a personal sanctuary filled with secrets. Over 30 ultra-rare vehicles, some so exotic they weren't even legal on US roads. But the shock wasn't just in the cars. It was in the handwritten notes tucked into glove boxes, the unfinished projects on lifts, and the mysterious legal web that held it all together. Who really owned the cars? Why were they registered through shadow companies? And why were some of the most valuable vehicles tagged for a future charity event that never happened? This isn't just the story of a garage, it's the story of a legacy. And what they uncovered inside Paul Walker's private automotive world left even his family stunned. To the world, Paul Walker was Brian O'Connor, the undercover cop with a need for speed, the heart of the fast and the furious. But in real life, Paul wasn't acting. He wasn't just reciting lines or driving stunt doubles. He was a genuine gearhead, a builder, a collector, a purist. Unlike many celebrities who flaunt their garages for clicks and clout, Paul kept his obsession private. There were no YouTube tours, no flashy Instagram reels. His garage wasn't a backdrop, it was a sanctuary. A space where he could tinker, think, and connect with something real. And what few knew was that this private garage held over 30 of the rarest cars in the world. Some were one-of-a-kind imports. Others had never been registered in the US. A few were mid-restoration, still on jacks, tools laid out, wires half-connected. These weren't trophies, they were stories in metal and gasoline. It wasn't a collection for show. It was a timeline of his life. Quietly over years he had built something sacred, something only a few ever saw, until the day his family had no choice but to open the doors. When the garage doors finally opened, even Paul Walker's closest friends were stunned. Inside, row after row of ultra-rare machines sat tightly packed in an industrial space in Valencia, California. This wasn't a random collection. It was a dream lineup, assembled quietly over years through private deals and hushed trades. No fanfare, no press. There were multiple Porsche 911s, a Ford GT, a Saleen S7, and a 1995 BMW M3 lightweight. A factory-built track car so rare that Paul owned 5 of them. But the real crown jewels? His Skyline GTRs. Modified Nissan R32s and R34s that he personally tuned, each one with meticulous handwritten logs and custom racing parts. One R34 was rumored to be the actual car he drove on screen. Some vehicles were barely legal. Others were never registered. A few had never even been photographed. And then came the deeper shock. Inside the glove boxes and consoles were handwritten notes. Not just specs or tuning tips, but personal messages, emotional snapshots. One note, tucked into a GTR, simply read, "This one's for Meadow. She'll drive it one day." This wasn't just a garage, it was a museum of memories. As they began inventorying the garage, something puzzling stood out. Paul Walker didn't legally own many of his own cars. The paperwork told a different story. Most of the titles, registrations, and VIN records traced back to a motorsports company called Always Evolving, a boutique racing and performance shop that Paul co-founded with his close friend and fellow driver Roger Rodas. On the surface, it looked like a sleek business built for car enthusiasts, but under the hood it was much more. Always Evolving functioned as a protective legal shell, allowing Paul to discreetly acquire, modify, and store cars without attracting attention. Some vehicles were registered to subsidiaries, others were technically leased or consigned. There were dual titles, shared ownerships, and builds still mid-finance. It was a web built for privacy, but one that unraveled fast after his death. Once estate attorneys got involved, everything blurred. Was a specific Skyline owned by Paul personally, or by the shop? Who had legal claim, the family, the business, or creditors? In some cases, cars were caught in limbo with missing titles or ongoing customizations still billed to Always Evolving. And then came the lawsuits. Former business partners emerged. Creditors demanded cuts. Legal teams scrambled to assess what was business inventory and what was part of Paul's personal estate. With over $18 million in vehicles at stake, what began as a quiet inventory turned into a financial and emotional minefield. Ironically, the same setup that once protected Paul's passion from public exposure now made his legacy more complicated. The cars weren't just rare, they were wrapped in legal fog, and the deeper they dug, the more tangled it became. As the garage was slowly documented, something unexpected began to surface. Handwritten notes, folded paper in glove boxes, sticky notes taped to dashboards, crumpled receipts with scribbles. They weren't left there by accident. They were Paul's fingerprints, his thoughts, feelings, and intentions. One note jammed into the center console of a BMW M3 lightweight simply read, "Might be the cleanest one left. Don't ever flip." Another inside a Skyline R34 said, "Feels like flying, smooth, angry, alive." These weren't specs. They were love letters to the cars he trusted with his life. But the most emotional find was a small sticky note inside a GTR. "This one's for Meadow. She'll drive it one day." A simple promise to his daughter tucked into the dashboard of one of the rarest cars he ever owned. That wasn't all. Several cars were marked with cryptic codes, RO or full notes saying Charity Roti 2W. They were earmarked for Reach Out Worldwide, Paul's non-profit that delivered disaster relief across the globe. Among them, a modified Supra never seen on screen, a Boss 302 Mustang tagged for a future charity gala that never happened. These weren't tribute ideas made after his death. These were plans already in motion. Paul had intended to use the value of his garage not for himself, but to give back. His passion was never selfish. It was deeply intentional. Not every car in Paul Walker's garage was pristine or even complete. In fact, several were stripped to bare shells, half-restored classics, wiring harnesses dangling, tools still resting beside them as if he had just stepped away. To outsiders, it might have looked like chaos. But to those who knew Paul, this was where he felt most at home. There was a Datsun 240Z, gutted and likely meant to be his next personal driver, a 60s-era muscle car with masking tape on the dash, scrawled with a handwritten to-do list. These weren't just half-finished projects. They were pieces of a future Paul was still building. Friends recall losing track of time with him in that garage. Paul would disappear into a world of engine tuning, soldering wires, debating exhaust setups. He didn't hire people to do it. He did it, hands-on, elbows deep in grease. His joy came not from showcasing the final product, but from crafting it. These unfinished builds weren't financial investments. They were time capsules, proof that Paul wasn't just a collector or a celebrity enthusiast. He was a builder, obsessed with the process, always learning, always perfecting. And perhaps most heartbreakingly, each project left incomplete became a symbol, not just of work unfinished, but of a future that would never come. As Paul's family stepped into the garage, the emotional weight hit harder than any legal challenge. For his daughter Meadow, just 15 at the time, it wasn't just about inventory or value. It was about memory, identity, legacy. Each car held a piece of the father she lost. Each unfinished build, a project they'd never get to complete together. The experience was as surreal as it was painful. For Paul's father, who took over as executor of the estate, the task became a bureaucratic nightmare. Some cars were missing titles, others had multiple parties claiming stakes. Creditors, former business associates, and even insurers emerged from the shadows, turning a deeply personal collection into a financial minefield. In 2020, 21 cars from the garage were auctioned off at Barrett-Jackson, bringing in over $2.3 million. But not everything was sold. Some vehicles were kept within the family. Others were quietly negotiated behind closed doors, shielded from the spotlight Paul had never wanted. And still, through the chaos, what cut deepest wasn't what the cars were worth. It was what they represented. Every legal form filed, every auction held, chipped away at the image of Paul as a private man quietly chasing his passion. In the And what they uncovered inside Paul Walker's garage wasn't just a fleet of rare cars. It was a mirror of the man himself. Yes, there were over 30 vehicles, some worth six figures, others priceless due to their rarity. But none of that truly defined the space. What made it powerful were the details. The sticky notes with track specs, the half-installed roll cages, the spare parts labeled for charity, the heartbeat behind the horsepower. Paul never flaunted his garage because it wasn't built to be seen, it was built to be felt. It was his lab, his therapy, his escape. He didn't collect cars to impress. He collected them to understand, to preserve, to connect. Even in death, Paul was still giving. Through his charity plans, his example, and the way he lived for more than just the spotlight. What they found wasn't a showroom. It was a soul. Paul Walker wasn't just pretending to be a car guy on screen. He was one, through and through. And if you feel the same heartbeat when you turn a wrench or hear a turbo spool, then maybe, just maybe, you understand why that garage was never meant to be public. It was meant to be personal. Like and subscribe for more untold stories that deserve to be remembered.